Day one of the trial included some very different versions, very different theories of how John O'Keefe died. Prosecutors call Karen Read a killer. The defense says she is being framed. For the first time, we're seeing Read at the scene in Canton. This is dashcam video from the first police officer on scene. Moments later, a frantic Karen Read is seen running back and forth in front of the cruiser, steps away from O'Keefe's body. Canton police officer Stephen Serif says he saw a man face up in the snow, later identified as O'Keefe. Read and two other women were huddled over him. The prosecution says Read backed her SUV into John O'Keefe, going at least 24 miles per hour, then left him for dead. That happened after the two fought following a night of heavy drinking, according to prosecutors. The defense says Read is being framed and O'Keefe was killed during a fight and a dog attack.
Hello, all you legal-minded friends, members, and replay viewers. Welcome. I'm Karen Cole from Legal Minded Friends, and today I have so many questions about the Karen Read trial, and we're going to get into some of the concerns I have noticed. We're going to do some critical thinking, and yeah, so let's get started.
So you just heard a bit of the news, but let me give you a little bit more background. The Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the United States has charged Karen Read of murder in the second degree of her boyfriend, a police officer named John O'Keefe. The charges also include that Read committed manslaughter while under the influence of alcohol when driving her car in a snowstorm, dropped her boyfriend off, then ran into him with her vehicle, left the scene where he obtained injuries and death. So the prosecution's theory is that her boyfriend wanted to end the relationship. She had gotten very angry after they had been out drinking together, and he wanted to go to this house party. She didn't want to go, so after dropping him off around midnight, she got very angry and all of a sudden reversed her vehicle into him. Law enforcement later found shattered bits of her taillight, yet the defense is saying that she broke her taillight in the morning, leaving his property to look for him when he didn't show up or return home.
Take a look at this video from the doorbell cam. It was taken at 5:03 a.m. And 5:03 a.m. is hours after Read and O'Keefe parted ways. And you can see right there in the circle that Read's taillight is right where it's supposed to be on her Lexus SUV.
5:03 to 5:08, you see her back in. She cracks the backup light onto Officer John O'Keefe's Traverse, which is behind there. See those tire tracks? She goes in at an angle, which means she definitely made contact with that side light that comes out 5 inches. We documented this.
Well, that's some great detective work. And if you want to hear more about how Karen Read's taillight could not have been in pieces where John O'Keefe was found, I'll leave you a link to the rest of this video that we just saw a clip from. So the defense is making another argument that Karen Read is being set up by law enforcement, and according to John O'Keefe's iPhone, he walked several steps after the defendant, Karen, dropped him off, inferring that he did, in fact, go into the house party, and he must have got into a fight or something. We'll talk more about that. So the question I have is, can you drive in reverse at 24 miles an hour? So the prosecution's theory is that after dropping her boyfriend off, she pulled forward 60 feet and reversed into him at a speed of 24 miles an hour. So my research found an article in Auto Blog by Josh Max from 2016, who tested a 2010 Audi S5, and he could not go faster than 12 miles an hour and in reverse. And he thought maybe he could push it a little bit faster to 15 miles per hour, but going that much faster would risk redlining the engine. So when an engine goes into redline, that's those little bars, on your dashboard displaying the maximum engine speed. So I have a link to another video if you want to know what kind of damage can happen if you do, go into the red line So that's quite interesting as well, because it's not very good for your car. So did she really go that fast? I don't know. I don't think it's possible. But anyway, I saw another YouTuber trying to reenact that speed. And you'll never guess what his results were, as they were very similar to the study. So I'll leave you with that link as well below. However, it's really interesting that this person that did the reenactment is a very strong supporter of Karen Read, and he was arrested for witness intimidation. Now, I think that's all been sorted, but yeah, I think it's really interesting that he did try to reenact that, and I think you'll find the results quite interesting. So I'm really looking forward to see how this is going to be proven by the prosecutor. As you know, the prosecutor has the burden of proof. And my further research found it appears that this info is stored on the onboard computer. But my question is, was she revving up the car? Would that give the same effects, or can they tell if it's being driven? So I don't know that part. So that might be something we find out in the trial. Okay, so the next issue I want to talk about is that the victim, John O'Keefe, had substantial injuries to his head and arm, and the defense is arguing that this indicates that he had a fight, and it could be bites or scratches from a dog, which oddly enough the party home owner had a German Shepherd named Chloe for 7 years, and the dog suddenly went missing, and the defense is saying that they have the evidence that Chloe was rehomed 4 months after the death of John O'Keefe. Now you've got the other side of that, where the prosecution doesn't believe the injuries to John O'Keefe's right arm are consistent with canine bites or scratches. So I looked up what scratches would look like, as we only have that photo that you can see there that they presented in court. We don't have any other angle. So yeah, so I looked up and did some comparison of photos, and I found a really good web page called Pet Coach, which I will leave you with a link below. However, you can see that dog scratches have a similar look, in my view, long with like a pierce at the top and digging lines that form the scratch. When I researched car accident scratches, they appear to be more like scrapes and being dragged, so a bit more jagged looking. Plus, so far in the trial, the evidence is the injuries to the arm were discovered by the emergency services attendants after removing the victim's sweater whilst he was in the ambulance. So they were performing life-saving treatment, and they obviously needed to remove his clothing. So I'm going to play some clips to see if you have the same question that I thought of. So let's have a listen.
What, if any, snow did you observe on or around him in that area? So the snow was probably up to the mid-axillary point, so we're looking at probably halfway up his rib point. Top of his body was clear. And do you know about how much snow was covering his body up to the mid-axillary? I'd say probably about 4 inches, 4 to 6 inches. Now, as far as your observations of Mr. O'Keefe when he's on the grounds, what, if any, observations did you make as far as how he was dressed? For the exposure, I'd say he was pretty underdressed. Long sleeve t-shirt, jeans, nothing really substantial to be out in that type of weather. You indicated removal of Mr. O'Keefe's clothing once in the ambulance, correct? Yes. What was it about the, sort of the condition of the clothing that led to the removal of that? So removal of clothing is actually pretty standard for any cardiac arrest, any traumatic injuries. We're basically trying to get further clues, because this is all happening very quickly. So we're trying to get more evidence of why are they here. We're looking for extremity injuries, crush injuries, bruising, anything that we could document, that we could pass on to the emergency room staff and doctors. So we would strip most patients. And as far as were you involved personally, as far as sort of the cutting of clothing and stripping the patient? Yes. And upon removal of the clothing, what, if anything, did you observe as to sort of the condition of the clothing or texture of the clothing at that point? Condition seems pretty well intact, but just wet and cold. And what, if any, relationship would the wet and cold clothing have to any of the diagnoses that you were running through in regard to Mr. O'Keefe? It would really just be the exposure to the weather would be our biggest trigger off of that, or if you had protruding injuries through the clothing, compound fractures, things like that. The clothing was intact, but we knew it was wet, it was cold. So as we strip things off of him, we can see underneath, basically, if there are any not every fracture breaks through the skin. Not everything causes obvious things, obvious signs. So as we strip the patient, we can begin to further assess.
To take you back just for a second to outside of the ambulance,
Yep.
What, if anything, specifically were you able to observe with reference to any injuries Mr. O'Keefe had sustained?
Injuries are pretty tough to see outside of the ambulance just due to the weather, due to the lighting. We have seen lighting on the ambulance as well, but
Let me ask you,
Yep.
as far as what, if any, difference did you know between the lighting in the back of the ambulance versus when you were with Mr. O'Keefe on the ground?
so he was still out in the weather at that point, so bleeding wasn't really obvious at that point. As soon as we get him into the back of the ambulance, then we start noticing hemorrhage from different areas of his body.
And when you say hemorrhage from different areas, which areas specifically?
So mostly from his mouth, his eyes, nose. Yeah.
And just to be clear for the record, when you use the term hemorrhage based on your training experience, what do you understand that?
Bleeding, external bleeding.
Now, you mentioned that there was some suctioning of Mr. O'Keefe's airway, is that correct?
Correct.
And what, if anything, specifically was suctioned from Mr. O'Keefe's airway?
Suction from the airway was mostly blood, blood, sputum.
And as far as the extremities are concerned, what, if anything, did you observe as far as injuries to Mr. O'Keefe's concerned?
So we're looking at, so we had the cold, rigid fingers, hands, feet, then we had multiple dry blood lacerations to the right arm.
Recall specifically where on Mr. O'Keefe's right arm?
Would have been his upper arm.
And you mentioned dry blood, is that correct?
Yes.
So these were not actively bleeding at the time that you observed them?
No.
Now, as far as being dry blood versus actively bleeding, what, if anything, does that indicate to you as far as sort of timing?
So we had active bleeding from other areas in the body. So the fact that it had already stopped and clotted, I would assume that would have been several hours before the incident that led him to be there, but I would guess earlier in the evening.
So you know that critical thinking means we have to look at alternatives, and could there be any other reason for something to have happened? So I questioned, why was the sweater not damaged if he was struck by a car, as the injuries on his arm look pretty deep? I would expect his clothing to be damaged. Could it be that he was in a warm house with his sleeves rolled up engaging in a fight? And could it be possible that the dog did attack John O'Keefe to protect whoever he was fighting with? Is it a possibility? Well, what happened to the clothing? Let's listen to the defense question another paramedic.
Now, with regard to the clothing that was cut, do you recall if it was the sweatshirt, the jeans, or both?
I don't recall.
Do you think, or is your memory, that the hoodie sweatshirt was left on him without being cut?
I don't recall.
Where did that clothing go after it was cut by the trauma shears during that ride?
Some of it would stay right on the stretcher, but I don't recall on all of it.
Okay, and some of it could have been on the floor of the ambulance as well?
Potentially.
And then once the ambulance arrives at the hospital, what is the protocol regarding the clothing that had been cut?
It gets transferred over to the RN in charge of the patient and usually stays in their room. Usually they'll put it in some sort of bag.
Okay, and is the clothing put in the bag? Does somebody meet you out at the ambulance in order to collect the clothing, or do you bring the clothing into the hospital in order to transfer it to an RN?
We bring it in.
And do you recall who it was that brought in that clothing?
No.
Who was with you at that time going into the hospital from the ambulance?
Not all informati.
So it had to be one of the three of you that delivered that clothing to an RN, correct?
Correct.
Do you know if all the clothing was delivered to an RN or if some stayed in the ambulance?
I don't recall.
And once you give the clothing to the RN, do you see where she takes it?
I don't recall.
Did you go into the treatment room wherever John O'Keefe was brought once he was at the hospital?
Yes.
And you had previously testified that you believe the clothing would have been brought in with him, correct?
Correct.
Do you have a memory of seeing that clothing within that treatment room at the hospital?
I don't recall.
Do you recall seeing the clothing on the floor?
I don't recall.
Okay.
What do you think is going on with his clothes? Gosh, where are they? I want to see them. Have I got you interested in this case? And if you want to watch a YouTuber that's giving the police side of interpretations, then I'm going to leave you with this YouTuber that you can see on the screen, and I will leave a link to that channel below. So there's an article that several people are calling to free Karen Read, the defendant, and CBS did an article on that. So I'll leave you with that in the links below, as this trial, in my view, is the trial of 2024, equivalent to that of O.J. Simpson trial in 1994, in which the decision that he was found not guilty was in 1995. This case against Karen Read, there is domestic abuse allegations, and LE are, being accused of not doing a thorough investigation. But, they didn't fully investigate the others that were at the party and instead are framing an innocent person. So, I thought there was a lot of similarities from that point of view. And there's other ways I think it's similar to the O.J. Simpson case. The media in the Karen Read case is already saying that the opening statements by the prosecutor are boring and monotone. And if you remember the O.J. case, the O.J. Simpson case, that prosecution service got really criticized for, being flat-toned and not prepared. But I don't know. This one seems to be prepared. It's just, they're not riveting, and the media is comparing the defense in the Karen Read case as bold and charismatic. So if you remembered the OJ case, the defense team was referred to as the dream team. So, I think there's a lot of similarities. I don't know. You'll have to let me know what you think.
To underscore how the prosecution is overwhelmed by the dream team, listen to how F. Lee Bailey turns Furman's history into something that makes the case for the defense, that O.J. Simpson has been framed.
So have I gotten you interested in this case? Because it's currently going on. You can watch it on Court TV. Yeah, I think it very well could be an uphill battle for the prosecution. We'll have to wait and see. Of course, I am going to keep an open mind and wait and see what the evidence brings out in this case. So please like this video if you like this kind of content. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell if you want to be notified when I'm going live or upload another video. I'm Karen Cole from Legal Minded Friends. Information is power, meaning if you know something, you can make decisions that are right for you.